Is the United States about to see a great rebellion? My guest in this episode thinks so. Alex Harper has made a deep study of triple conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn, and he believes they are early harbingers of rebellions, uprisings, and even revolutions. We've just seen one of these triple conjunctions in Aries in April of this year when, among other things, oil refineries were going up in flames all around the world and energy supplies came under great pressure. Alex believes that downstream of this conjunction, we're likely to see uprisings and rebellions around the world, including in the United States. And he's done some incredible research that points to the year 2030 as a time when the US Constitution could experience a great reset. That's very interesting indeed, because all sorts of other techniques are pointing to the year 2030 as an extremely important one. In this interview video, Alex takes us through his triple conjunction research, and then we get into a discussion of what the future of the United States over the next 10 years or so could look like.
In 6 years, when everyone is rising up, you can go back and watch this video and you see that we were telling you that this is going to happen. That it's like 1776 part 2 is 2032.
Please like the video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and show it some support. And before we get going, just a quick word about the next monthly World Astrology Report live stream. Once again, it's a two-part stream, and this time we're going to be asking and trying to answer questions about the Ukraine-Russia war. That conflict seems to be coming to a head right now. Has it reached its end game? Or is it about to become a frozen conflict? And what's coming for Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky? We're going to look at this conflict from multiple astrological angles using several different mundane techniques, and I'm going to show you how I put different layers together to produce a forecast. Part 1 of the stream will be free for all on YouTube. Part 2 will be paywalled because I've got to pay the bills. You can purchase entry to Part 2 on the live streams page of my website, details below. But the stream, as always, will be free for members of the website and for YouTube members at correspondent tier. All right, let's get into the video. Alex Harper, welcome to World Astrology Report.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
You are very welcome. And I know you've got some really interesting research to present to us today on triple conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn, one of which we actually saw in the skies in April of this year. So this is very relevant to what's going on right now and where we are heading in the world over the next few years. So without further ado, take it away, Alex.
All right. Well, so first, I'd like to just say that I'm going to give a presentation about what Dan just said, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. These are the 3 planets involved. And if you're a follower of Dan's channel, you'll be familiar with the synodic cycles of the planets, where 2 planets meet, and as they make aspects to each other, then mundane events unfold, right? So this follows the same formula that you guys are familiar with, but it adds a certain thing about like what happens when there's a triple conjunction, when there's 3 planetary energies intermingling instead of just 2. How does that change the equation? This is something that I have been wondering in my own mundane astrology research, and the conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn caught my eye, actually due to the fact of these transits having activated my own personal natal chart and having profound effects in my life is actually the reason why I started to investigate these transits. But I've got a presentation I would like to give about them and what they mean. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. Okay, so we are talking about triple conjunctions of 3 planets. The 3 planets involved are Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. We are all familiar with these planets. Mercury is the planet of communication, media. It rules the sign of Virgo, which often represents the workers or the people. Mars is the planet of war, conquest, and aggression. And Saturn is associated with the enforcement of hierarchy, structure, authority, and time. Now, other mundane astrologers have linked the synodic cycle of Mars and Saturn when they conjoin to be linked with armed conflicts and wars, right? And that is true. But I noticed these triple conjunctions and I wanted to know what was different when Mercury was involved. How did the synodic cycles where Mercury was present for the Saturn-Mars conjunction, how were those different than the plain old bog standard Saturn-Mars conjunctions, right? That was the question that I set out to answer with this research. So when you add all of these archetypes together, you get rebellions, uprisings, revolutions, wars of independence, and the brutal efforts to suppress them. The images on the screen here are from Indonesia in the 1990s, when there was a series of these triple conjunctions of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn that took place in the mid to late 90s. And the synodic aspects that were made by Mars, which was the triggering planet, to the position of this triple conjunction correlated basically perfectly with the overthrow of the Indonesian government and the Reformasi era. We'll get more into the details later, but just to give you a 30,000 feet perspective, these conjunctions herald these kinds of themes. Now, the thing is that I've looked through thousands of years of history for these triple conjunctions, and the pattern is very strange. One thing I would mention is that it seems that the vast majority of these conjunctions occur in the signs of Pisces and Aries, and relatively very few occur in any of the other signs. It's something like 60% of the triple conjunctions of these planets over the last 6,000 years have occurred in either Aries or Pisces, which I think is symbolically interesting, given that Pisces is the sign of the collective and Aries is the sign of the individual, and this is about revolutions. Now, the thing is that because all three planets involved, Mercury, Mars, and Saturn, they all have irregular elliptical orbits, right? So the meeting of the three of them is unpredictable. Like, for example, we will have a series where Mercury, Mars, and Saturn will make a triple conjunction within 5 degrees of each other. And this will occur every 2 years for like a 6 or 8 year period. And then there'll be nothing for decades. And then we'll get one isolated triple conjunction and then nothing for another couple decades. And then we'll get like another set of patterns, right? So I've gone through the history and tried to look at the patterns to see what I can find. And I mean, one of the cleanest examples is the French Revolution. So with this, we see that the triple conjunction is taking place here. Right here. Mercury, Mars, and Saturn are meeting here in Pisces, right? And this chart is around March 19th. Right, so during this time period, the elections for the Estates General in France were being held. Now, this was an ongoing process that went from January to April, right? And this is like roughly in the middle of it, right? And we see this Mercury-Mars-Saturn conjunction taking place, right? Now, what we want to look for is we want to look for Mars, because Mars is going to be the trigger planet. Mercury is a trigger planet, but less so in this. Mercury, when it makes aspects to the conjunction, it more so symbols like communication or news about the events, less so the actual violence taking place. So if we're interested in the violence, we want to look at Mars for the trigger planet. And if we go forward, so we see it's here around 10, 15 degrees of Pisces, right? Now, we go forward, and we'll see when Mars is here around 10 degrees of Gemini, so it squares the previous position that the conjunction took place in Pisces. we get July 14th, storming of the Bastille. 3 days later, Mars perfects its aspect to squaring that triple conjunction that took place during the election of the Estates General. And I'm sorry for people that are unfamiliar with the history of the French Revolution. Perhaps I'm glossing it over, but basically this is the start of it, right? Like this is when it all kicked off, right? Because the Bastille represented the corruption of the king. And according to the revolutionaries, political prisoners were being held there. And the storming of the Bastille is really like, that kicks off the French Revolution in earnest, right? So now what do we have that happens next? Well, what happens next is we have the opposition. So this is when Saturn and Mars go opposite each other, right? So we can look here and we see Saturn is opposite Mars, right? There's a temporary peace. It seems as though there's a solution reached, but it doesn't last, right? This is when there's a constitutional monarchy established in France. There's the Declaration of the Rights of Man, but King Louis didn't end up lasting, right? And so this peace that was made on the Mars-Saturn opposition didn't end up holding.
Something? Can I
Yes,
just, sorry to
please
interrupt,
jump in.
just to jump in for a second, because I think there's something we might want to clarify with these cycles, because we can look at, say we have the triple conjunction, we saw it at 10 and 15 degrees of, was it Pisces?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Mars is going to then move around the zodiac, and it will make aspects both to the place of that original conjunction and to Saturn.
Yes.
So we maybe want to distinguish between those.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one thing I was wondering about this with this research, and I found that both are important, right? So both when Mars makes the aspect to the degree of the conjunction and when it actually makes the opposition and the aspect to Saturn in the transit sky, basically both trigger events, right? And I think that basically when it comes to the opposition, there's something about the Saturn-Mars opposition that it seems like when Mars squares the position of the original conjunction, that's an activation. And then when Mars opposes actual Saturn, there's another activation. When Mars gets to, for example, when Mars got to 10 to 15 degrees of Virgo, there was not a lot going on, right? Or it was like there was stuff happening, like the negotiations for this stuff was happening, right? The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizen were being worked out at the time that Mars would have been at 10 to 15 degrees of Virgo, but it wasn't actually announced until it made the perfection of the aspect to Saturn. And so basically the way I've used this technique is that I give a range. So the range begins when Mars reaches the degree to where it would make a hard aspect with the original degree of the triple conjunction, right? So that's the start of the range. And the end of the range is when it actually perfects the aspect to Saturn in the transiting sky, right? And so, and this date range will become clear when I use the Indonesia example. This gives a very clear working of how this mechanism works. So that's a great question. Glad you asked that. But basically, we have to consider both Mars aspecting both the degree of the original conjunction and at transiting Saturn. And to answer this question, we should look at the next series of triple conjunctions that happened in the French Revolution, because we see here that in 1791, there was a triple conjunction of Mars, Mercury, and Saturn in Aries, right? And so if we want to look and see what happens after this, to see what triggers it, then we go forward and we see Mars when it gets to, this is the Champ de Mars massacre occurs in 17 July 1791, a little bit before Mars gets here. This is for 8th of August. But Mars was basically approaching here, and the fighting after this massacre did intensify. And so basically, once this massacre happened, like, it was some of the bloodiest fighting of the revolution up to that point. And then we also see when Mars actually makes its perfected square to Saturn, where they're both at, Mars is at 18 degrees Cancer, Saturn is at 18 degrees Aries, we get this declaration of Pillnitz, which basically re-radicalized the Frenchmen and reignited everything, right? So we see that, like, in between the time it took for Mars to square the position of the original triple conjunction, which was at 10, 11 degrees Aries, and then when it gets to this, there was a big burst of fighting, then this agreement. It seemed like the revolutionaries were defeated at this point. It seemed like they were going to give up. But then this declaration of Pillnitz, where the Holy Russian Empire declares support for King Louis, it re-radicalizes the Frenchmen and gives them a new hope to fight. And we can see that this Mars square brings out the hope to fight in people by looking at the Haitian Revolution, which occurred very close in time. So this occurred on the exact day of the Mars-Saturn square, and it was the largest revolution since the unsuccessful slave uprising of Spartacus in ancient Rome, and actually led to a state founding from free of slavery. So we see that these patterns, when Mars squares the triple conjunction, there's always violence, right? There's always some kind of escalation. My last example of this is Indonesia in the 1990s, which we started this presentation with. So for Indonesia in the 1990s, there was a series of triple conjunctions. Now, the date ranges I have listed here: July 12th through July 20th, July 24th through August 5th, August 7th through August 24th. These are the date ranges in which Mars first squares the degree of the triple conjunction and then actually squares transit Saturn, right? So that's where I get the date ranges, right? And it was during these days that the first protests against the Indonesian government began, right? And then, so here, same thing we see in 1996. July 24th, Mars gets to the degree of the triple conjunction, and the widespread riots break out, and then they peak when Mars actually squares Saturn, right? Here in 1998, by the end of August, they were doing these public trials of previous people that they had overthrown in the government, right? And there was all of this reform stuff. And so there was like a big public show, like the trials for the Reformasi took place during this date range. So basically, the Mars is the trigger planet for this, and we want to watch Mars, and as it perfects from squaring or making an opposition to the degree of the triple conjunction, and then actually squaring or opposing Saturn, that's the range of time that we want to look at for activation. So what does this mean for us, right? So we've recently had one of these, and it took place here in Aries. And what happened on the day that it took place? Well, the U.S. Army increased its maximum enlistment age and removed the requirement that you can't be convicted for marijuana possession in order to join the military, clearly trying to open things up, right? Now, This is the first triple conjunction that will take place in a series of triple conjunctions that will happen, right? The next one is going to happen in 2032, right? So that's 6 years from now. So there's a lot to change between now and then. But in terms of what's coming up for the next aspect, Mars, it's going to be late August, early September. That's when Mars is going to square the position that we see here, because we've got the triple conjunction taking place very tight at 8 degrees, right, of Aries. So when Mars gets into that region of Cancer, things are going to light up. Now, this is what makes me nervous about this, is that the Mars square, so when we see Mars is here at 8 degrees of Cancer, squaring the original degree of the triple conjunction, this just so happens to fall on a Muslim holy day that celebrates the birth of Muhammad, for which in recent years, the Israelis have attacked the Palestinian celebrations of. And so one obvious fear here is that there could be some Israeli action that is like so egregious that it gets widespread international attention. That's one possible way this could play out. But we're talking about that's the Palestinian war of revolution and independence. But I think that this actually has implications for the United States. And, the protests or the objection may stem from the United States' involvement in these foreign wars. But I ultimately believe that there will be something that happens in America. There will be some protests that occur that are, it basically doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for the United States with this. And when I originally did this presentation about the triple conjunctions, I was asked about why I was so sure it would apply to the United States. And I think I have an answer that I'm ready to share with you. But before I go on, I just want to know, Dan, is there anything you want to ask or clarify at this point?
Well, I'm sure you have thought about why these conjunctions do this, obviously, but is it because obviously there's like Mercury kind of has this aspect to it of kind of dissent and discourse and discussion and so forth, or critique, maybe we could say. So that may well be an element, but it also occurs to me that Mercury has this relation to exchange and trade. And
Yes.
if we look back at what was going on at the triple conjunction in April, it was a triple conjunction of these planets, and Neptune was also involved. And we had this situation there where it seemed like the kind of oil market was breaking down. There was these big problems with energy and so forth. And I wonder if you've thought about whether sometimes these are also, they provide kind of financial triggers as well, and that those are often drivers of revolution when people are really feeling the pinch, and that often sends them onto the streets. I don't know if you've seen any of that with this.
Yes. So I have not looked specifically into the correlation with the financial markets, but as we know, war and the stock market often go hand in hand, right? And there's often a lot of money to be made going with war. I think Mercury's influence here speaks to like kind of maybe agitprop. It agitates people. It's like propaganda is present and it gets people whipped up, right? And that's what I think Mercury's presence here is doing. Obviously, there's always going to be lots of shady financial transactions and insider trading going on with any kind of wartime stuff, especially planned false flags. You're going to get that kind of insider trading. So I guess Mercury could play a part in that. But to me, it seems like when I look at the synodic cycles of Saturn and Mars, Mercury seems to stand out in that it is the people against the government, right? It's always some kind of uprising. Like that seems to be what makes it different than the other bog standard Mars-Saturn cycles, is that when Mercury is involved, it's always the people uprising against something else. And it's like wars of independence. So I've been asked why I think that this will impact the United States, this particular one, right? Because the last example I gave was Indonesia, right? So, obviously there was a revolution that occurred in Indonesia in the 1990s, but there wasn't revolutions that occurred other places, right? Like a lot of other places in the world, it was stable, right? So how can we tell where this Mercury, Mars, Saturn triple conjunction revolutionary effect is going to be felt? Well, I don't pretend to have the answer to that. There's a lot of people that might try different things like astrocartography, seeing where the lines lay when the aspect perfects. There's lots of different theories that you might do. But I basically had a hunch that it was going to involve the United States. And I set out to try and find corroborating evidence that this is going to involve the United States. And this is what I've found. And this is what I'm really excited to share, because this also allows me to get up on a soapbox with my own personal bone to pick, which is with the USA Sibley chart. Every astrologer uses the USA Sibley chart, including my gracious host, Dan Waits, right? He uses the USA Sibley chart. Now, I am a respectful contrarian and always like to take the minority opinion. And I believe that the USA Sibley chart is not the best chart to consult when we're looking at the government of the United States in particular. And I have put together something that I will believe convince you that it's actually the chart of the Constitution that we should be looking at for activations. Because, when we think about it symbolically, the Sibley chart is the Declaration of Independence. It's the start of the war. It's not the start of the government. At that point, there was no real government. It was just a bunch of states in rebellion. So the real start of this country was with the Articles of Confederation, which didn't last very long. Then they went defunct. And then we had the Constitution. And so the Constitution, when it was signed on September 17th, 1787 at 4:00 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is the chart that I use for mundane predictions for the United States. And I think that when you see how it all lines up, it's kind of quite something. So I'm going to go back to my presentation here. We have got the triple conjunction here of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn taking place on April 20th, right? What is happening here? All right, well, this triple conjunction is squaring pretty close to the natal Mars of the United States Constitution. And we see here that it's also squaring the nodal axis of the United States Constitution. All right, so we've got the north and south node here at the beginning of the cardinal signs. We've also got Mars here at the beginning of the cardinal signs. All right, so it activates this chart. When we go forward to the square that I'm predicting where there's going to be some trouble and protests, we see here for this chart, the square, Mars is conjunct the natal Mars, and we've got Jupiter on the descendant. Mercury is Cazimi. Like the chart is being activated, right? But it's not that convincing, right? It's like, why should we think that this really is impacting this chart this much, right? Like that's a question that I think is fair to ask. And I have an answer, but before I answer it, I want to go back in time, because this cycle that is happening here is also resonant with another cycle the United States goes through with Mahadashas. Now, this is called the Vimshatari Mahadasha. So this is from Vedic astrology. And if you're familiar with other types of kind of Time Lord techniques like Fredaria or zodiacal releasing, you can essentially think of the Mahadashas as the Vedic version of something like that, where it is a timing system that is used to map out periods for a person's life or for a country's life. And so it basically shows what planets are being activated at a specific time, right? And the United States, it's based on the position of the moon at the time of birth, and then the moon moves through nakshatras at a rate of 120-year cycles. So basically, this is the Vedic answer to zodiacal releasing or Fredaria. And I personally use, I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer. I apply the tropical zodiac to everything. It's my opinion that even with nakshatras, they were also just convenient signposts. The constellations were just convenient signposts, just like the tropical zodiac signs. I know it's controversial, but I set everything to tropical. Like, I'm sorry, sidereal people, but tropical is right. It's all tropical. So, basically, we see here that we get when we have this switchover of these specific periods, Ketu Saturn, Ketu Mercury, Venus Venus, and Venus Sun. These periods, these 4 periods here, always correspond with the expansion of federal government power or the restriction of federal government power and the rights of the citizenry, right? So I have the first example is that the Bill of Rights is first passed in 1789, and it lands right here in one of these 4 dashas that I've lined out. We also get the 11th Amendment, which was key in determining the federal government's power. Before the 11th Amendment, states were free to sue each other in federal courts, right? After the 11th Amendment, that was no longer possible. And so it made the federal government stronger, basically. And the states had to follow the federal government's lead. It was also when the United States put down their first rebellion, happened during these periods that I'm pointing out. So the periods we want to look at is Ketu Saturn, Ketu Mercury, Venus Venus, and Venus Sun. If we go forward 120 years later, we see this repeat. And what do we get but similar themes, right? So we're in the Ketu Saturn, Ketu Mercury, Venus Venus, Venus Sun periods. We get alternate Immigration Act of 1907, which severely restricts immigration. The Tillman Act of 1907, this actually was pretty good workers' rights type of things. FILA was also expanded the authority to sue against the federal government for abuses. There was several Supreme Court rulings that expanded federal government power. We had income tax being passed. We had the Mann Act being passed, which basically was a kind of backwards way to kind of do like some Jim Crow style stuff. The Mann Act was basically a interstate trafficking against interstate trafficking of prostitutes, but it was basically applied on a racially profiled basis, the Mann Act. So, and then we also have the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 happening all within this window, right? So the common theme here between these, so if we go back here, we see, all right, everyone's rights are being set up. The federal government's establishing its dominance. It's putting down rebellions, right? Then we fast forward 120 years later, when the same Mahadashas are happening. We have the federal government restricting immigration, who can come in and out of this country. We have the federal government saying that, oh, you can't sue us in courts, that we have federal immunity, right? The federal government cannot be sued by the states. All of this. We have them imposing income tax on the citizenry, which they'd never done before. And they created the Federal Reserve, which I'm sure to your audience does not need any introduction about, like, the implications of that, right? It's happening again now. We're in the same periods. And what's happened so far? Well, we had the one big beautiful bill that was passed in July 2025, which greatly expanded the United States government's ability to enforce immigration laws and expand it, gave the federal government a lot more authority. And so I think we're going to see a similar series of moves of federal expansion of power in line with the themes that we saw setting up, where it's all about taking away people's rights, taxing them more, controlling who can come in and out, right? What you can do, right? So the reason why I think that this triple conjunction of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn is going to be significant for the United States is that it also lines up with this larger cycle of the United States Mahadashas. Now, if we go and we look at Election Day 2026, we see here that Mars is at 20 degrees of Leo. This is important. It's conjunct Jupiter and Ketu, the south node of the moon, and it's opposing the Saturn of the United States Constitution. It does not seem great. Pluto's also on the ascendant of the United States Constitution, or within a fair degree of orb. We don't know exactly when this was signed. I think it's enough to be concerned. Now, going forward, we see that when the results of the election are going to be put forward, when people would take their oaths of office after the 2026 election, we see there's a full moon on the angles of the United States constitutional chart. So what I think this means is that the results of this election are going to be contested. There's going to be basically the fraudulent election results, allegations that have happened every election for the last 4 years, is going to be even more this time. And I think it's going to push things to a breaking point.
Alex, I have a little observation which has probably occurred to you, but if you go back to the election chart,
Yeah.
you pointed out that Mars in that chart is at 20 degrees of Leo, which is where the eclipse that's taking place in about 2 weeks' time is happening, right? We're getting a solar eclipse at 20 degrees of Leo. So Mars on election day is going to be triggering that eclipse.
Yeah.
So it might be worth paying close attention to what is happening around the time of this eclipse, because that will kind of clue us into what's going to get triggered later.
Yes. And that period of time with the eclipse is also the same time that Mars is squaring the position of the triple conjunction. So the eclipse and the Mars square of the triple conjunction basically happen simultaneously. And so what I'm putting to you is that whatever happens in the last 10 days of August, first few days of September, is going to be related to what comes with the election and then what comes later. And what I think is coming later is this: when Mars stations direct in April of 2027, we have Pluto on the ascendant of the Constitution chart, we have Mars stationing direct here again at 20 degrees of Leo, conjunct Ketu and Jupiter. And so this seems like, this just reads to me as like oath breaker, right? Like something happens here that breaks, like, I feel like there's going to be a major allegation of some illegality in the election process because it's going to escalate way further than any of the other contests have up until this point. The fact that Mars keeps triggering this 20 degrees Leo spot, to me, shows that's a significant part in the zodiac to pay attention to. Now, when we go forward to here, we see this is where Mars is finally opposite the triple conjunction. So the triple conjunction, if you recall, occurred at 10 degrees of Aries. Here it is. Here Mars is at 10 degrees of Libra. And we have this new moon taking place, conjunct Venus, opposite Pluto, on the angles of the United States Constitution. I feel like this is a contemplation of a new beginning and an undoing, right? This is something that I think if we're going to have protests, widespread protests, this is a big opportunity for it, right? Because all of August of next year looks really wild. We've got here on the full moon, this full moon is a Venus Cazimi, and it's conjunct Saturn in the United States chart. So this is really, I mean, what do you think about this, Dan? Like, what this chart to me is saying, it's also Mars conjunct the Neptune up here. There's a lot going on. And I think that this full moon on the Saturn of the United States Constitution, it's also an eclipse. And it's very close to the 20 degrees Leo region. And so we keep getting this activated over and over.
Yeah, when I've seen Saturn in Aquarius activated in mundane charts, one of the things that I've seen is restructuring of countries, like new structures or rules or expansions, or like, an expansion is not typically a Saturnian word, but there's like a sort of, if you think about Saturn actually being quite strong in Aquarius, there's some new kind of holding structure or a kind of a refixing of it somehow, which often comes out with these Saturn in Aquarius activations that I've seen.
Yes. And so I think that this could be something where a new plan is being formulated. Now, I don't think we'll actually see, like, I don't think the government's going to fall apart here, right? I think that this is the tension and the buildup and the planning phase of all of this. But it does tie into Agenda 2030. This is the last chart for August of 2027 that is important. This is when Mars is actually opposite Saturn by transit. Here we see they're actually opposing each other. So this is the end of this is when the triple conjunction that happened in April 20th, 2026 is going to peak. And we have a new moon with a Venus return and Jupiter. So to me, this is a renewal, right? This is starting over on the United States Constitution. This is kind of, ripping it up and going back to scratch. Could there be a constitutional convention called? Who knows? It's very close. There could be. If another state signs on, if enough states sign on, there could be a constitutional convention. But I don't think that we will actually feel the effects, or that this will actually be fully known what happens until 2030. Because when we look at the solar return for 2030 in September, we see the entire 8th house stellium that the United States Constitution chart has. All the planets are returning. And so in the chart, you see,
Oh, wow.
this is the birthday. Mercury is conjunct the natal Mercury. Venus is conjunct the natal Venus. The sun's conjunct the natal sun, right? Mars is at 20 degrees of Leo, right? And so when in a solar return reading, Abu Mashar says that when a planet returns to the same degree that it is in the natal chart, it is called retaking the oath, right? And so this is when the natal promise gets fulfilled. This is when the cycle begins anew. And so I am saying here that whatever happens this August, and during these subsequent 20 degrees of Leo activations, that's going to lead to the breakdown of the country and the institution of Agenda 2030, where it's going to basically be a new state after this. The Constitution's going to be gone, and it's not going to be the United States of America anymore. It's going to be the technate of North America, or the United States Incorporated, or the Western Hemisphere Incorporated, or whatever thing you want to call it. But I can't ignore the fact that we have all of this activation here, and then at 2030, just when everyone's been telling us, oh, Agenda 2030, this is when everything's going to change, the Constitution has a solar return chart that perfectly represents everything being torn up and put back together again. And if this wasn't enough proof for you, we can look at the progressions, the secondary progressions of the United States Constitution chart. Now, secondary progressions is a timing technique wherein one day of 1 year of real time is equivalent to 1 day in the chart's time, right? So this is used as a timing technique. And we see that between the years of September of 2030, 2031, 2032, look, there's going to be a full moon that happens in the progressions, right? So over these 3 years, the full moon in the secondary progress chart. We also have Jupiter right here changing signs into the 9th house, right? Which is the house of rulership and government, right? So it's like in the secondary progression chart of the Constitution speaks to a full moon moment where Jupiter, the king, is changing signs and going into the 9th house. So it's like a new ruler is coming. Right? And so to me, this is the end of the United States as a democracy and the beginning of the United States as an empire. Right? This is basically the breakdown of the government that the United States has seen so far. And it can all be tracked through the chart, the natal chart of the Constitution.
Can I ask
Go
a
ahead.
question? Do you think, just looking at that Constitution chart and the planets that are returning in 2030, we have the Sun, we have Venus, we have Mercury, this is the 8th house. Do you think this can relate to the financial structure of the country as well? Perhaps something related to the move to digital currencies? Does that really represent a fundamental change in how it works?
So if you're familiar with Catherine Austin Fitts, she talks about how the government has trillions in unfunded liabilities, and they want to switch from the dollar to a digital currency in order to basically get out of a lot of these unfunded liabilities and basically rinse the books, essentially. All of this happening in the 8th house makes perfect sense for that. So if you're looking for a timeline when is the CBDC digital control grid coming? Well, here you go. September 2030, when the solar return of the Constitution has all of this activation in the 8th house of finances and shared resources. Everything is being renewed. Everything's being torn up, right? They're all retaking the oath, right? So it's like the old deal is no longer on the table. There's a new deal coming, right? And I don't know as if we're going to like it very much.
I think this is really, really interesting just because 2030 is highlighted in other ways, or beyond the fact that that's the year that's being targeted for Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals and all of that. We have other cycles that are pointing to 2030. We've got, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle even as well, which is reaching its opposition then. The Kronos-Hades synodic cycle as well is reaching its conjunction at that time. It's something I did a video on a little while back. So there's lots of stuff, but what I find really interesting about this is, I haven't seen this before, and it's fascinating in the way that it kind of reconfirms the importance of that year in terms of some sort of reset, and we can probably guess it's shifting us into this new digital regime, right?
Yes, it is. And we also have Pluto on the ascendant of the United States Constitution when this happens. So it's like the destruction of the old. However, I know that what I have said seems like the black pill. It seems like, the globalists, the controllers, whatever you want to call them, they've got us by the short and curlies. They're going to screw us over. But I don't believe that, right? I don't believe that, because I believe there is hope. And that's what I've got on the next slide, is that there's 6 long years that we have to wait without another triple conjunction of Mercury, Saturn, and Mars. But one does come. It does come. And it comes here in 2032. June 1st, 2032. We get a triple conjunction of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn conjunct the natal Jupiter of the United States Constitution. Right?
Well, it's also conjunct not too far from the Mars of the Sibley chart, which I know you've moved to this chart here, but like that chart also works, I think. It's kind of interesting.
We also have the exact Pluto return of the United States Constitution here.
This touches on something important as well, which I think is worth mentioning, which is just that there was a lot of hullabaloo about the Pluto return of the United States in recent years in the astrology community, and something that occurred to me a while ago is just, this is just the Pluto return of the Declaration of Independence, but it's not the Pluto return of the Constitution and the United States government. And so this Pluto return was always going to look like more of a long process that played out over many years. And that Pluto return of the establishment, was it the Constitution 1787, and I think Washington's sworn in 1789, if I'm not wrong. So the Pluto return of that is also obviously going to be significant, and you've really helped us to kind of, I think, see a little bit more about what that might involve here.
Well, but just wait, there's more, because when we get to the square, right? So when Mars squares the position of the triple conjunction, guess what? It's right on the sun of the United States Constitution. And Saturn is right on the Mars of the United States Constitution. And we've got, I feel like this, if there's going to be a 1776 part 2, it's here. It's 2032. That's what I'm seeing here. This is what I think, is that I think that when they try and institute this control grid, people aren't going to like it. And they're going to go back and they're going to say, hey, what the hell? Like, they're going to remember the ideals of Jupiter, right? And they're going to want to fight for it. And I think that this is when we see the American spirit rise up, and the rebellious spirit. I think that there's going to be a flash in the pan this August. There's going to be some kind of effort that is suppressed, and we're beaten down. But we should not give up hope, because I really do. I see this this looks like a revitalization. This is like people fighting to bring it back. You know, this is like trying to return to the ideals, right? Because, and like you said, it also is conjunct the Mars in the United States Sibley chart, right? And so, you know, it's activating a lot for the United States these 2 years. And so I want to say that, like, even though we're like kind of looking down the barrel of 2030, we shouldn't give up, right? There's always hope. And I believe that, you know, this is something that's important. Now, another thing is that back in the 1800s, we had a similar thing where the Greek War of Independence was launched in 1821 under a triple conjunction of these planets. And there wasn't another triple conjunction for 6 years, but they held out and they kept fighting. And then when that second triple conjunction happened 6 years later, the rebels got a second wind, and the Greek War of Independence was successful, right? And so and that's the analog that I can see in history for this. And so I think that it's going to be a long, drawn out process. But this whole thing about the New World Order and Agenda 2030 and Klaus Schwab wanting us to all eat bugs, people are not going to take this lying down. And after a couple of years of it, people are going to get sick of it. And in 6 years, when everyone is rising up, you can go back and watch this video, and you see that we were telling you that this is going to happen. That it's like 1776 part 2 is 2032.
All right, that's almost it for the video. Do seek Alex out. He's doing some great astrology on his live YouTube show. Details below.
I am at Baleful Rays on Twitter, X, and YouTube. Alex Harper is the YouTube channel. Just look up Alex Harper or at Baleful Rays. You'll find me. Going to be opening up for chart readings, maybe eventually. I don't know. But I have a lot of things planned. You should check it out. Check me out. I've got a lot going on, and actually going to be doing a lot more live streams on YouTube. So I do live chart reads. I do predictions. People can call into the show. It's fun. It's always live. I kind of just go by the seat of my pants. And yeah, Alex Harper at Baleful Rays. Look me up and see what you find.
And now in the version of this video for members of the channel, whether here on YouTube, at any tier, or on my website, Alex and I start riffing on the subject of the astrology of the digital control grid, the future of the US, and the 2030s. And Alex explains why he thinks some explosive and very embarrassing information is going to come out soon about a certain Melania Trump and her relationship with a certain Jeffrey Epstein. Thanks for watching, and see you again on this channel very soon.